It is Thursday, July 2nd, 1863. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. In the night, George Gordon Meade and his Army of the Potomac has created a highly defensible position on the heights south of Gettysburg. His position, starting at the steep hill outside the town called Culp's Hill, stretching across a ridge named Cemetery Ridge, and being capped off at the south on two hills called Little and Big Round Top. The position controls two important roads, the Baltimore Pike and the Taneytown Road, that gives Meade not only contact to the federal capital at Washington, D.C., but more importantly, it gives him access for more reinforcements to come in and supplies to bolster his army. Meade is in an extremely advantageous position as long as his subordinates obey his commands. Robert E. Lee and his Army of Northern Virginia has positioned themselves on the Seminary Ridge, completely parallel to the Union lines. Lee had taken the town of Gettysburg and routed the two federal corps the day before. His objective is to destroy the federal army, and in his eyes, he was preparing to destroy on this day. His plan is simple. He will strike at the south with Longstreet's corps, then Ewell will attack at the north, with Hill's corps supporting both attacks. Lee's plan is to stun the federal army, then push in their flanks. By doing so, collapse the entire Army of the Potomac, thereby destroying it and marching in force to Washington. James Longstreet, however, disagrees. He had his own scouts observe the Union positions in the night. He understands Meade's strength, and more specifically, the importance of those two roads. Even as the sun is rising on July 2nd, the Union 5th and 6th Corps, almost 25,000 extra men, were marched up from Maryland into Gettysburg. Also, Longstreet himself was not at full strength. He had only 2 of his 3 divisions present and did not feel confident in any attack without his full corps present. General Lee, however, disagreed, directing A.P. Hill to send the division of General Richard Anderson to support Longstreet's attack. Longstreet agreed to the attack, but was delayed as he awaited for a final brigade to arrive to begin the assault on the Union lines. On the federal side of the field, the Union troops were sitting idle, awaiting any coming maneuvers or assaults by the Southerners, except for one. 3rd Corps Commander Daniel Sickles did not feel comfortable in his position. In fact, he was concerned viewing the sloping of the field before him. Sickles had been caught in a similar situation at the Battle of Chancellorsville, where the Confederates were able to position artillery on higher ground and tear apart his corps. Now, according to Meade's plan, Sickles was the end of the Union line and was directed to place troops on top of the 2 hills, Little and Big Round Top. Instead, he advanced a few yards towards the Emmitsburg Road, splitting General David Birney's 5,000 men, sending some to a rocky position on the Union left called Devil's Den, while the rest of Birney's division would advance the Emmitsburg Road. General Andrew Humphrey's division was also advanced to the road, now leaving a gap between the Union's 2nd and 3rd Corps and leaving the federal left flank vulnerable. At 4 o'clock, Longstreet finally had his corps in position to attack, but now he also noticed that the entire 3rd Corps was yards ahead of where it had been earlier. John Bell Hood, one of Longstreet's division commanders, suggested they swing right and just take the 3rd Corps from the rear and flank. However, Longstreet did not have the luxury to divert from Lee's plan, so denied it. At 4 o'clock p.m., hours delayed, the Confederates bombarded the federal left. As the artillery rang out on the left, Meade was inspecting Union lines and became slightly concerned. He directed his chief of engineers, Gouverneur Warren. "Warren, I hear a little peppering going on in the direction of the little hill off yonder. I wish you would ride over, and if anything serious is going on, attend to it." Warren dutifully saluted, riding towards Little Round Top, where he was the first senior general to realize what Sickles had done. Climbing to the top of the hill, the only defense he found there was a small detachment from the Signal Corps, and the rest of the Third Corps was moved away from the position. Taking out his binoculars, he observed the Third Corps being struck by rebel artillery, but he observed two other things. He could see a division of Lafayette McLaws staging for an attack at Sickles' front, and to the right of them another division coming from the north. But more importantly, he observed in the woods to the left the sun reflecting. Looking more at the position, he figured out what it was. Hood's division was moving to commit their assault that now, with the Third Corps being forward, made it easier to surprise them. Before contacting Meade, Warren quickly acted, requesting troops, and General Sykes in the 5th Corps had been coming up the Taneytown Road, and the brigade of Colonel Strong Vincent was proud to move up to the hill. Meanwhile, back in the front of the hill, Hood was beginning his attack, advancing out of the woods heading towards the highly depleted Union left flank. Leading the attack was Robertson's famous Texas Brigade, who was moving towards Devil's Den just to be shocked by the pockets of Birney's men who were now making a defense. Hood, however, would be wounded when an artillery shell exploded near him, severely wounding him and having him removed from the field. At this point, one of Meade's staff, ironically his son, Captain George Meade, was informed of the Third Corps' new position and quickly informed his father what was occurring. Robertson slammed into Devil's Den, throwing back Birney's men, chasing them through the rocks, which caused more chaos to the fighting. As Devil's Den fell, McLaw's attack had finally begun, and the rest of the Third Corps was getting hit. But to Robertson's right was General Evander Law's Alabama Brigade, and their objective was the Round Tops. The Texans had momentarily halted after taking Devil's Den. They observed the hill before them and the valley between them and Little Round Top. This land will be remembered to this day as the Valley of Death. Back on Little Round Top, General Warren had Colonel Vincent's brigade position itself as follows: to the extreme left of the end of the Union Army, the 20th Maine; to their right, the 83rd Pennsylvania; then the 44th New York, and capped by the 16th Michigan, and then to their right, other units would fall in. Warren had also grabbed the regiment from the 5th Corps, the 140th New York, commanded by Colonel Patty O'Rourke, who assisted Warren in getting an artillery battery to the top of the hill. As the regiment crested the top of the hill, he saw oncoming Confederates coming from the Valley of Death. The other Federals began to fire on the oncoming wave of troops. O'Rourke jumped in front of his men and yelled, "Down this way, boys," in an attempt to organize his men. Then once organized, he commanded them, "Here they are, men, commence firing." Moments later, O'Rourke will be shot in the neck, collapsing, but his regiment successfully held as the rest of the 5th Corps began to dump into the battle to restructure the Union lines. The scene at the summit of Little Round Top was turning into chaos. General Warren had also been shot, nearly killing him, and the commander of the artillery battery, Hazlitt, was also killed. Colonel Vincent, realizing the chaotic situation, as now he had men from the 5th, 3rd, and even more confused 2nd Corps in his ranks, did his best to control the situation. Proudly, he jumped on a large boulder, waving his riding whip, yelled to all his men under his command, "Don't give them an inch." He would be shot in his groin doing this, and die a few days later. Back on the left, however, Law's Alabamians were moving up the gap between the Round Tops towards the Federal flank, where Colonel Joshua Chamberlain and the 20th Maine was awaiting them. 6 times the Alabamians would attack and be repulsed by the Maine men, who were ordered to hold at all costs by General Warren and Colonel Vincent, both of whom were now wounded and removed from the field. Colonel Chamberlain knew his regiment would not be able to sustain a 7th attack, so he decided his best course forward would be to prepare for hand-to-hand combat, but also push the Southerners off the hill. He ordered his men to fix bayonets. As the Alabamians made their final assault, Chamberlain, at the head, charged down the slope of the 20th Maine, pushing the Alabamians off the Round Tops and field for the day. Hood's attack would end with his withdrawal of the Alabamians, as Law, who had now assumed command of the division, was not sure much more could be done, as the 5th, 6th, and 12th Corps troops were moving into position to fight. Of Lee's plan, all that was taken was Devil's Den, and another veteran division commander was wounded on the Confederate side, and on the Union side, General Warren was wounded. Meade furiously rode to Sickles. The two men had zero like for each other. Sickles found Meade to be a West Point fool, like many other West Point officers, and Meade openly referred to Sickles as a murderer. Sickles had killed his wife's lover, the district attorney of Washington, D.C., but also the son of author of the Star-Spangled Banner, Philip Barton Key. In fact, right near the White House in Washington, D.C., and was able to get acquitted for the crime by reason of temporary insanity, the first of its kind. But when Meade arrived to the scene, the two men began to violently disagree, Meade yelling at Sickles while Sickles talking down to his commander, sarcastically asking if he would like him to withdraw. As the two argued, McLaw's 1st Brigades under Kershaw was striking into the gap between Birney's split division, causing Meade to realize how serious the danger was now. The 3rd Corps, now on all fronts, was engaged as Kershaw, supported by Hood's brigades under Benning, began to move towards a large Wheatfield. Meade was no longer thinking of saving the 3rd Corps. Instead, he needed to restore his lines and delay the Confederates long enough for the entire army to restructure. His first step was to contact his most trusted lieutenant, and that was Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, and the 2nd Corps, one of the most experienced corps of the Army. Without hesitation, he ordered Hancock to move a division to support the 3rd Corps' fight, but more importantly, to delay McLaw's attack long enough for reinforcements to arrive. By 5:30, Kershaw had split Birney from his men in the south, and now the Peach Orchard, where General Humphrey's men were being attacked. General William Barksdale and his Mississippi Brigade began to slam into Sickles' salient, and Humphrey's division was so spread out that they began to slowly deteriorate. The 3rd Corps' lines were so thin that Sickles had artillery placed in line with infantry in order to stretch them out. It is during this attack General Sickles would also become a casualty to the fighting, when he rode to a knoll to get a better view of the fighting. A 12-pounder solid shot from a Confederate's strayed and ricocheted from the ground, hitting the general in his leg, twisting it in almost 360 degrees. 2 stories exist from this. The first being Sickles fell from his horse, then calmly was carried off the battlefield smoking a cigar as his corps collapsed around him. The second, and probably truest one, the general fell from his horse, was screaming in pain the entire way off the field. Birney was now put in command of the 3rd, but he was in command of a sinking ship as the corps was collapsing in all ways. All he could do at this point was protect his depleting position. Hancock was directed a division to support the fighting, commanded by General John Caldwell. Under his command were the brigades of General Samuel Zook, Colonel Edward Cross, John Brooke, and Patrick Kelly. Colonel Kelly was in charge of the famous Irish Brigade, and as the brigade was marching towards Sickles' salient, they were stopped. The chaplain of the 88th New York and later president of Notre Dame University, Father William Corby, stopped the entire brigade. The brigade and nearby Catholic soldiers gathered around Father Corby, who climbed upon a rock as artillery and bullets whizzed by and gave the final sacrament of the Roman Catholic Church, the sacrament of absolution, that all their earthly sins to be forgiven. As he finished, he cheered out to his soldiers, "Now go get them, my fighting Irish." Caldwell and his division arrived to the staging area The remaining parts of the 3rd Corps were protecting the division as they deployed to move into this Wheatfield. At this point, Birney's division was in shambles, and Humphreys' division was only holding on by a thin hair as more Confederates attacked. The division pushed into the Wheatfield and was able to successfully push out the brigade of General Anderson and was actually taking ground. But when Humphreys' division finally collapsed, the rest of McLaws' division began to close in on the 2nd Corps division, which was becoming surrounded. However, while this was all taking place, the 5th and 12th Corps were being dumped onto the field. Meade was restructuring his position as the 3rd Corps was being scattered across the front. But also, Hancock was facing his own issues as General Richard Anderson's Confederate division had moved in on McLaws' left flank to support the fighting and was not able to assist Caldwell, who was becoming surrounded. After long fighting, the division finally collapsed after being surrounded on 3 sides, and they withdrew towards the Taneytown Road. But the Confederate front now, straight line, was facing off with a restructured and reinforced line around 7 o'clock as Hood's division began its assault on Little Round Top. Anderson and McLaws began to attempt their attack. Anderson, who was aiding Longstreet's attack, had also sent one brigade to attack a significantly weakened gap between the 2nd and 3rd Corps, where a single regiment was. General Hancock rode up to the regiment stating, "What regiment is this?" The colonel, William Colville, responded, "1st Minnesota, sir." Hancock pointed out to the Confederate brigade commanded by General Camden Wilcox, "Attack that line." The 1st Minnesota, only 250 men, charged Wilcox's brigade of 1,726 men, delaying them long enough for General Willard's brigade to support and stop Wilcox's advance. Simultaneously, Anderson sent Wright's division to attack the western slope of Cemetery Ridge, which would be repulsed by the 2nd and 1st Corps men who were awaiting them. As night fell, Longstreet finally called off the attacks. The Confederates had gained nothing in the south. They gained Devil's Den and then slammed into the new Federal line. Meade's position had worked. He was able to hold his left flank and, importantly, the Taneytown Road and the Baltimore Pike. Lee was in shock at the failure and would have to devise one last plan of attack and pray the thousands of casualties will be worth it.